Cincinnati Bengals have some decisions to make this offseason to get to the Super Bowl in 2023 or February 2024, technically. Let's talk about their biggest needs and how they could attack this offseason.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Lisco. He's your host, James Rapien. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network here on Locked On Bengals, bringing you coverage of your team every day, free and available everywhere you get your podcasts and on YouTube. So hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube, that follow button if you're listening on your audio platform of choice, and join the First Listen Club with the many thousands of others of Bengals fans that make us their first listen every day. Today's episode of Locked On Bengals is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Place your first $5 bet to get $150 in free bets, win or lose, at FanDuel.com/lockedon. James, big offseason. Got one more year of Joe Burrow before his cap number really begins to get big, before it begins to take up a big part of your salary cap. At least one more year. Because that fourth year of the rookie deal, even if they do extend him, which we've talked about and we expect, won't get that large. We're not talking about a $50 million cap hit right away, even if Joe Burrow does take home an extra, $100 million in cash. That's not going to be reflected in the cap hit quite yet. So, given that you have this 1 to 2 more years of flexibility before some of your current rookie contracts expand, we know about the free agents. We've talked about some of the free agents that they've got on both sides of the ball: Hayden Hurst, Jermaine Pratt, Von Bell, Jesse Bates, etc. What's the biggest thing that we want to see them do this offseason? James, I'm putting you on the spot to start.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And the biggest thing is to keep that $50 million per year, $500 million quarterback upright. And that's the thing. Frankly, it's the only thing that matters outside of, keeping those weapons. And if you can do that, I think you would argue if you could have done it the past 2 seasons. And I get it. They had injuries, and that was part of it, a big part of it this year. But you might have 2 Lombardis, at Paycor Stadium, and we might be having this might be Locked On Super Bowl, and that would be how we go by, changing the name of this podcast, which is a good idea and might happen if they get it done in Vegas next year. Point being, though, right tackle to me is the spot. That's the spot that, if you look at it, and I like La'el Collins, and I thought he played through some issues, but now he's 30. Now he's coming off of an ACL, and you just said it. There needs to be some urgency because the cap hits are going to come soon. They're going to come quick, and it's going to be harder. If you're going to make that splash at right tackle, not that they're going to go out and spend, give a Terran Armstead type deal to a right tackle, but they can go out and get a guy. And I see a lot of these drafts where it's like they need to address tackle. I'm going to throw this at you. How comfortable would you be if a rookie at the end of round 1 steps in and is the starting right tackle day 1? Because if that happens, I think La'el Collins, there's a good chance he would be around, or there would be a veteran swing tackle or something. You would have to have some kind of insurance if you're banking on a rookie. And it's not like the Bengals, when they drafted Cordell Volson, were banking on him at left guard. They were actually banking on Jackson Carman, and it didn't work. And Volson was able to show that he was okay as a 4th rounder. I get it. It would be potentially a 1st round pick, but you don't know who's going to be there. I would be scared, I think, and worried if we're going into the draft this year and they haven't addressed that right tackle spot. What do you think?
It's a little bit challenging without knowing more about La'el Collins' recovery, and we're not going to know by the time the draft comes around, and that has to be part of the Bengals' thinking, right? Mm-hmm. Is that by late April, early May, Collins is going to be, 4 months removed, maybe 5 months removed. Do we know when he had his surgery?
He had it, I believe he had it in early January, so
January, February, March, April. So you're talking about 4 months away from the surgery. you're not really going to know when he's going to be back at that point.
No,
And
I mean,
so
you might not know in camp when he's going to be back.
right. I mean, and I don't know if I've said this on the air or if it's just been when we've been talking, but given Lyle Collins' history, there's a small chance that he just doesn't get back next year. He's missed a year for an injury before, and I'm not saying that's going to happen. There's no reason to think that's going to happen. There's no reason to think that he's going to have an extraordinarily complicated recovery. We just don't know anything right now. The Bengals certainly know more than we do about the scope of the injury, about the scope of the repair, about the initial prognosis, about how he's done in early rehab. But they still don't know, I would say, enough to say when he's going to be back. Mm-hmm. And you could ask him the same question about Cheeto, and you could ask Cheeto, and he doesn't know when he's going to be back, and his surgery and injury was earlier in the year. So that makes it really hard to want to go into this draft, regardless of how you feel about this tackle class. And it doesn't necessarily feel like 27, right? Is where they're picking?
28.
I couldn't remember with the vacated pick in the first round. Yeah, it's only 31 first round picks this year. You're gonna bank on waiting for that pick for the guy you want to be there, and for him to not only be there but then be the right guy, because we know how the NFL is about putting too much stock into their own evaluations. At the same time, you look at free agents. Orlando Brown is never going to play right tackle again. That's why he left Baltimore.
Good. Don't want him.
So not going to be Orlando Brown. That's your top of the market guy. Mm-hmm. Mike McGlinchey, next guy on the list. Jawan Taylor. Who else are we talking about here? I don't think Caleb McGarry is a fit. A bunch of free agent interior linemen this year. Kelvin Beachum, you want a stopgap? There's a 1-year guy you could go look at, maybe a couple of years at a low dollar amount. A name that we're probably going to talk about a lot as we get into some free agency like targets and simulation kind of stuff. Jermaine Eluemunor, who is projected to get a 2-year sub $4 million per year deal, just 28 years old, coming off a career year. That one's one that, Joe and I have talked about. Joe's tweeted about as well, Joe Goodberry. So the challenge is finding the right guy in free agency to be that temporary piece and have it fit in the salary cap. Like Cameron Fleming, a name that we probably would have laughed at a few years ago, has kind of carved out a solid couple of years for himself. Could be a cheaper option. If they had signed Morgan Moses last year, I don't know. Maybe he's hurt too. But we saw what happened with depth. So can you get a guy who's going to be okay without breaking the bank? Because they can't break the bank of the position. And that is their challenge, is the balance between the expenditure, the cap hit, and the uncertainty of figuring it out in the draft.
Up next, I'm going to, respond to that, because it's interesting. You said something that I don't necessarily agree with. And I hope that Duke Tobin doesn't agree with it. So we'll get to that next. We'll get to that next here on Locked On Bengals. But first, today's show is brought to you by the one, the only Built Bar, the number one protein bar on the planet. The protein bar that every Bengals offensive lineman, offensive player, defensive player, everyone on the roster, coaching staff, they should have in their lives, because it's covered in 100% chocolate, high in protein, low sugar, low calories. It's perfect for you, Joe Burrow, Lyle Collins as he recovers from his ACL, maybe one of those right tackles that Jake mentioned that I'm going to talk about in just a second. The point is Built Bar. They taste great, and you need to get them in your life right now. So go to Built.com for more, or you can check them out at your nearest Sam's Club or Walmart. Yes, you can go in store. You can look at them. You can buy in there. You don't have to necessarily go to Built.com anymore, even though that's where I get them. You can get them at Walmart and Sam's Club as well. So don't delay. Try the number one protein bar on the planet, Built Bar, at Built.com.
All right, James, challenge me. Let's see how much we disagree here. Let's have a conversation.
Why can't they break the bank? Like, why can't they go get Mike McGlinchey? Mike McGlinchey's affordable. Like, they can do that this year. And
That's a Terran Armstead deal.
They might not. No, it's not. They might not. It's not.
Terran Armstead is a $15 million per year deal, and Mike McGlinchey is projected at 4 years, $15.5 million.
Terran Armstead was projected at like $22 million in free
agency
agency last year.
So maybe you're just talking about a different contract and not Terran Armstead.
Terran Armstead with the Dolphins, he didn't get that.
$15 million a year is what he got.
Okay, well, you can give $15 million a year to a tackle. So there, I'll rephrase it. You can for what? For 3 years? He's 28. He hasn't played at Terran Armstead's level. He played in 8 games last year, and then this year he obviously played pretty well. I don't think he's going to get huge money where it's just scary. And if you're willing to move on from a Joe Mixon, then I think that there is room. It's not like we're saying bring back McGlinchey, also have a huge cap hit with Jesse Bates, or sign McGlinchey. You also have a huge cap hit with Jesse Bates and Jermaine Pratt. No, I think those guys are gone. And so if those guys are gone, you can spend somewhere. And I think the spot would be right tackle.
So hypothetically they could, right? If they did a lot of things differently than they've done them. Like a lot of things. Going back to the all-in episode and the things we talked about them doing differently, that means doing all of them. Not just 2 out of 3 or 75% or whatever. It means you're going to move on from Joe Mixon. You're going to structure contracts differently, and you're going to maybe try to find some restructures to free up space in the short term. And
maybe they don't extend T this offseason. I'm not saying they shouldn't, but what would you say the extension is? Like, how likely? I would say it's 50-50 at best. It's the same agent as Jesse Bates. It's going to be tough to get that done.
The Mulligata factor is definitely significant. I mean, we've been talking about it for 2 years now. We've been talking about the Mulligata factor with T. Higgins in the offing. Yeah.
I think that they could, to me, don't find the guy that could be the Quentin Spain of right tackle. I need to find someone, if I'm Duke Tobin, that's going to make the block that's necessary with the game on the line, period. Right? They're gonna stick with Cordell Volson, and they're going to continue to develop him. They're not going to go break the bank on a left guard. We've been here, done that. We've seen it. Maybe they stumble into someone in the draft and he beats Volson out or something like that. They're not going to do that. You obviously love Alex Kappa, Ted Karras, Jonah. We already had that conversation on Monday's show. So if you missed that, he's going to be back. He's going to play left tackle. Why wouldn't you go after a guy that suddenly you'd have everything that you thought La'el Collins was, and then some? I don't know. And by the way, this would also be contingent. They can move on from La'el and obviously open up some money there.
Well, they can't really immediately do that, right? I don't know if we talked about this with Andre on the show or not. I can't remember.
We did. No, we did.
Okay.
But
so for people that missed it,
it's not completely shut though either. And he kind of did that. Like, injured players ultimately end up getting waived, and you can save that money.
You can save some money. So if they waive La'el Collins before he can pass a physical, if they hypothetically wanted to do that, the cap savings would be $4 million instead of $6 million is the difference. So again,
so 11 of so moving on, let's just say they did that, right? 4 instead of 6 plus Mixon. That's already the cap hit and then some for McGlinchey this year.
Probably not the way the Bengals do deals. So again, this is what we're talking
going
about.
Back.
We're talking about the same thing. If they prorate more money and they don't do the year 1 roster bonus that they always do, that puts more, because they always, their tendency is to put more money into more cap hit money into the first year of the deal so that they maintain future cap flexibility. But you see a lot of other teams doing that constantly do these restructures and are doing cap gymnastics every year. And you look at it and you're like, oh, the Saints have negative $60 million in cap space. How are they going to field the team next year? Well, that's part of the plan, right? They know where their restructures are. They know how to manipulate the cap to free up space, and they're making free agent moves every year anyway, right? So it's not necessarily the easiest thing to entirely shift to that when all of your contracts that you set up so far are not set up with that strategy in mind coming down the road. But to your point, if they did all the things that we talked about, right? then you can make the McGlinchey move. You can try to bring back a couple of your own guys, and you might be able to sign a couple other low dollar free agents.
And the other thing that we discussed, they have no one on the books. So
For when?
For in a couple of years, and that'll
Right.
probably change. It'll be Burrow, right? Again, I think the T deal, we'll see. Hopefully they can get something done. But even if they do, it's not going to be a 6-year deal where he's suddenly under contract through 2029. It'll be a 3-year deal or a 4-year deal. And so to me, I think, and one, the cap's going up. So McGlinchey, let's say you got him for, let's go 14 million.
Oh, you're undercutting Brad Spielberger.
Well, yeah. Okay. So,
right.
and hopefully we'll get Brad on, but no, they're not always, projections are projections. Let's do 15. Fine. You get McGlinchey for 15 for what? 3 years? Well, he has it at 4.
He has it at 4 years, 37.25 guaranteed.
Okay. Now's the time to do these things. That's the thing. And I don't want to give them a pass and talk about Cam Fleming. By the way, Cam Fleming might be a great guy. I don't want to talk about a $2 million a year or $4 million a year guy protecting Joe Burrow when they're supposed to go make a Super Bowl run. Unless it's a rookie that's amazing, which it's really hard to do at 28 to get that done. It just is at right tackle.
It's an interesting position for them to be in, because if they spend another $15 million on the offensive line, that puts them at $59 million for positional spending on the offensive line next year. So you cut Collins, maybe you move $4 million off of that for cap purposes. Your top 5 spending team on your offensive line better have a top 5 offensive line if you're spending that kind of money.
They'd be really, I don't know about top 5.
Does that make them? I know it makes them better because you don't have a starting right tackle right now, but does that improve their depth? It kind of is like the same depth as they have this year at that point, right?
All right. Also, if the Bengals have 3 injured offensive line starters next year, they're not going to win the Super Bowl.
You're in a tough spot.
It's going to be really hard to do. A spoiler. It's tough. It's when you're missing 3 starters. So obviously you want health there. And I'm not making excuses. It's just what it is. But yeah, that would be what would Jonah be, their 4th best lineman?
I don't think he's that different from Mike McGlinchey. So
you like Jonah more than our listeners will hear that though and be like, whoa.
Well, who do they think Mike McGlinchey is? There aren't very many great tackles available. Yeah, he's a solid starter.
Correct.
Jonah's an average starter. That's pretty close to solid starter.
The Bengals haven't had a solid starter at right tackle since Andre Smith. That's the answer.
Probably. Yeah.
Think about that. It's crazy. And so that's why it's so high on my list. Is it's like, all right, I get it. They're not going to pay a left tackle to come in. They do have Jonah for 1 more year. They're going to probably stick with Volson. Makes sense. Get it cheap. And he's played pretty well considering the circumstances and expectations. Karras, they really like. Kappa was great. All right. So right tackle it is. Who's at right tackle? They should be in on those guys. And it might not be. Maybe it's Taylor. Maybe like Jawan Taylor, not Mike McGlinchey.
Or Isaiah Wynn, potentially. Buy low.
He would be cheap.
Cheaper.
Single digits.
He's projected 2 years, 10.5 a year, just because starting level tackles in the NFL. Look at what Collins just got paid.
7 a year.
With incentives to make it go higher.
Sure. And Wynn may have the incentives. Yeah, but he's had some injuries and stuff like that. I wouldn't love Wynn either because there's a huge question mark there, health-wise.
We're once again, man, we did this last year. We're once again talking about
time is a flat circle, Jake.
Finding better offensive linemen, and
let's hit some other needs.
I don't think they're gonna do it. Ugh. I don't think they're going to go spend $15 million on a right tackle. I would give that like a 5% chance of happening.
If they were ever going to, I feel like now would be the time because they could move off of some guys and
I hear you.
and replace those guys in the draft. And so we could talk about some of the other needs because I think you're probably right, but maybe I could will it into existence. Today's show also brought to you by FanDuel, and FanDuel is the number one sports book in America. Why? Well, one of the reasons is their no sweat first bet, where you can get as a new customer up to $1,000 in bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. And so maybe you want to wager on NFL futures. Maybe it's all things NBA, and maybe you wagered on All-Star Weekend over the weekend. But FanDuel has something for everyone. I've used FanDuel. It's a ton of fun. And let's just use the NBA, for example, since games are picking back up. You can wager on how many points LeBron scores, how many blocks he gets, how many turnovers Russell Westbrook has as a member of the Clippers. Oh, man, kicking Russ while he's down. Well, you can do that and so much more at FanDuel. So don't miss your chance to get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 at FanDuel.com/locked-on. That's FanDuel.com/locked-on. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA.
So turns out there are more positions on a football field than right tackle.
Oh,
Where do we go next, James? We talk about tight ends. Everybody's mocking a tight end to the Bengals.
tight end could help. Yeah, tight end could help for sure.
Maybe
But,
we spend this entire episode on the offense after all.
I think tight ends in the mix. Certainly from a draft standpoint, even if they sign a Hurst or one of these guys in free agency, certainly in the mix. I think cornerback is something you can never sleep on when it comes to the Bengals. I saw a mock that had them taking a safety. That would be really surprising if they took a safety in the first round. And even if they did let Bell walk, and I think we all assume Jesse Bates is leaving. So
they would have to sign somebody if they let both those guys go.
Wouldn't they? Yeah, you'd want to bring a veteran.
There would be somebody.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you. Like you could bring a veteran in and have that veteran. Maybe you draft another safety, but maybe not because, well, you took Tyson Anderson last year. It wasn't just Dax Hill. And I think that they like Tyson Anderson. And when you're talking about a third safety, can Tyson Anderson fill that void? Maybe.
I mean, they've surprised us in safety before too. Like it could just be Tyson Anderson and Dax Hill next year.
Could be.
They've
because you get cheap at that position. You get cheap at that position group, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the trade-off and the interesting balance is where are they going to get cheaper to go in and maybe spend more on the offensive line or spend more.
And is that what you want?
Or
is that what they want? Is that where they want to go, where they're spending money on the offensive line? I don't know. It's a reasonable idea. Look at what just happened in the Super Bowl, right? You had two teams that highly invested in their offensive line, had varying degrees of weapons outside of that, had quarterbacks playing at a really high level. So, okay.
I don't think anyone would.
Money there.
Yeah, I don't think anybody would criticize them if they decided to spend more on the line. But
the Eagles spent the fourth least money in the NFL on safety last year. The Chiefs were like bottom 12.
Well, yeah, because they had just paid the guy who didn't know Hayden Hurst's name. I'm not going to name him. Justin Reed.
You named him. You did it.
Yeah, I did. But look, maybe part of it is I'm sick and tired of talking about the offensive line. But the Bengals may look at it differently. They may say, we like 4 of our 5 guys. Lyle Collins, we like when he's healthy. We'll see if he's healthy. If not, Akeem Adeniji.
Or Jackson Carman.
At right tackle, Jackson Carman. Everyone just talked about how he's in his natural position, right? And heck, there might be some that say, oh, we'll move Jonah or do this or do.
Some people are probably pretty mad at us for this Jackson Carman tone we've taken the last 2 days.
Whatever. I mean,
I'm just acknowledging them. I'm acknowledging those of you that are mad at us.
I'm sure. I'm sure people are. It's sometimes you don't like to hear the truth. The truth is, I don't think the Bengals can trust Jackson Carman to do what he's supposed to do. Because if they could, he would have beat out Cordell Volson. I'm not trying to be like he should have. He should have beat out Cordell Volson. And he probably should have beat out Xavier Su'a-Filo.
It is probably a little bit challenging for them to look at what they've invested in the offensive line, what they feel they've invested in the offensive line, and feel like they still have to do it. But this is what happens when you have injuries, when you get the wrong guys, when you miss in the draft, because they've, got the second round pick and the fourth round pick and the fourth round pick and the sixth round pick and the 3 free agents.
Where would you invest?
In the first round pick?
Do you agree with a jumping off point offensive, or would you go pass rusher? Would you go explosive receiver? Would you go in another direction, or would you say right tackle if they were going to,
like, we're talking free agency?
Sure. Biggest need, not even necessarily how they address it.
Well,
you said biggest need.
I think they need to figure out a starter at right tackle.
Sure. Okay.
I think that's fair, but I don't know if that means like that's where I want to spend the most money this offseason.
Okay.
Because if I'm thinking I'm Duke Tobin and I want to make the biggest splash and like concentrate money in one guy who I think is going to help the team the most, it might not be tackle. It might be that I think I can get a guy that's cheaper and serviceable and have the depth be roughly the same. Because Collins was serviceable. And when Collins was healthy,
oh yeah,
they were fine in the offensive line when they were healthy, right? So if you get a guy that's like at that level, it shouldn't cost as much, because Collins did not play up to the level of his salary, as modest as it was for a player of his pedigree. So like if I can spend $5 million a year on tackle and get a guy that I think is going to be able to protect as well as Collins did last year, which should be doable, and then spend more money on a Javon Hargrave or a tight end.
Ooh. You're saying you want Mike Gesicki?
Well, I would shoot a little higher.
Oh, who?
Dalton Schultz. I like Dalton Schultz for the tight ends.
Oh,
and we're talking about a top of the tight end guy. And I don't top of the tight end class, free agency group, or whatever. I don't think the Bengals do that either, right? But if I'm thinking, where am I going to drop a lot of money? One, the Bengals don't think that way. They're going to try to get 3 guys for $20 million instead of 1 guy for $15 million and 2 guys for 1, right? You know what I mean? Like that's their.
So you're saying they're not going to be in on Saquon Barkley?
What's he even going to get paid? It's not a good year to be a running back in the NFL.
Nope. They can't keep Joe.
That's a whole nother.
They can't keep Joe, right?
Not at that number, especially look at the Aaron Jones stuff in Green Bay. Like there's a clear framework there. Whew. Anyway,
we should talk about Mixon a little more this week at some point. There's more there. Anyways,
it's a big topic. I just when you talk about spending big money at one position, one, the Bengals don't do it. 2, I think about trying to find the player that's going to make the biggest difference. And if you feel okay about 4 of your linemen, and you know what Collins was last year, like how much better is a $15 million tackle going to be versus what you got out of Collins last year versus adding a guy like Javon Hargrave?
Oh, well, sure. I think McGlinchey would already be pushing it to.
Yeah, I don't think they do either of those things.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
But Hargrave would be pushing it even more, and right. And then you're getting into Reader's future and how it impacts that, and all of those things. Like with McGlinchey, you could say, all right, well, Jonah's probably off the books unless he balls out in 2023. He's off the books the next year, and now that offensive line number drops, you probably have a rookie behind him. Second-year player in 24. Who knows? But it's fun. It's fun to talk about.
And I think you have to look at the draft class too, which we haven't done yet. Hopefully we'll get to a primer this week, later in the week, maybe early next week, and talk about really just like where the strength is of this class. It doesn't feel, based on what I've read so far and talk to people who have been deep in this class so far, it doesn't feel like a tremendously strong draft class in general. And the depth does line up in a few spots, tight end, running back. We've talked about that. But the, interior offensive line is pretty tough this year. Tackle is pretty top heavy this year. So like figuring out where you think you're going to be able to get value in the draft and how that informs your free agency decisions is all part of it. But it looks like we have some stuff to talk about, James. Some good discussion here today about, Mike McGlinchey versus opportunity cost essentially.
Yeah. And I could get on board with the journeyman if you're confident that you can be competent at right tackle. That's what I'm looking for. And towards the end of the year, it was tough. And who knows what they do. But there's a lot to dive into that we can do in the upcoming days and weeks.
And the question is really, where else does that money go? How can you take the slice of the pie that you have from a cash perspective, from a cap perspective, after you deal with Joe Burrow, after you maybe deal with T. Higgins, and get the most bang for your buck to help your team the most this year? And that's a question that we're going to continue to try to answer, that they're going to answer when free agency comes around. James, we started our free agent spreadsheet, our tier list. It's up. I'll have to send you the link because I don't think I have yet. And you can start to go put your tiers in there.
Breaking news.
And we'll be ready to talk about that here in the near future as well. The combine coming up, of course, and we're getting into the offseason. Still in that little bit of a dead period. We're going to have a mailbag coming up this week. Keep your eyes out for that. It's a mailbag part of the year here as well. But we appreciate you listening to this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. And until next time, Hoo day and have a good one.